strike next? Here to weigh in on this is Director of the International Security and Defense Policy Center at the RAND Corporation, Mr. Seth Jones. Thanks so much for joining us, Seth.
Thanks for having me on.
Well, this attack, a little bit different than what we've been seeing in North America or in the UK, in London. It's not simple. Not a rifle, not a car involved, a knife. This is a bomb. Are we going to be seeing more of this?
Well, most of the inspired attacks by individuals have really chosen simple types of material like knives, as you noted, vehicles. This suggests a more sophisticated attack, which indicates that he likely went to places like Libya and Syria and trained. We don't know yet whether he conducted training in camps, but that's been the historical pattern. So if we see more people coming to these places that have trained and have expertise in bomb making, we may see more of these types of attacks.
Yeah, the simple attacks, it makes you think maybe one or two people were involved. Something this big makes you think it was coordinated. I know you probably can't be so specific in answering this next question, but we want to know, where is this going to happen next? Any indication of where that might be?
No, what we know when we look at past patterns of ISIS attacks or their current propaganda right now, they're talking about public locations, concert halls, the entrance of airports, markets. These are the areas that they've attacked recently, train stations, places that are very difficult to defend and easy to get people onto. So I would expect something along those lines.
Yeah, Seth, it's even sad that we have to ask that question. Remember after 9/11, we were saying, will this happen again? Well, in this situation now, here we are all these years later, we know it's going to happen again. It's about preparing. How do we make sure what's happening in Europe with all these open borders, they're not vetting, they're opening their borders to families like this, and this is how they're paid back in return, killing children. How can we make sure it's not going to happen here in the United States?
Well, there are a couple ways. One is we've got to be very careful how we're vetting people coming into this country, but or leaving and then going to places like Libya, Syria, and Iraq that may be conducting training and coming back.
Yeah, what's happening in Libya? This guy went to Libya. His friends are saying he just came back a few days ago. What's going on there? How are they training these guys?
Well, in 2011, after the Obama administration was involved in overthrowing the government, there's very little that went into rebuilding the country, so it's deteriorated into a number of militia groups. And it is without a doubt the hottest area of jihadist activity in North Africa right now. There are a lot of training camps across the country, including along the Mediterranean, by groups like ISIS, by groups like Al-Qaeda. And so people have come in for training, and look at how close it is to Europe. Easy to get back to.
I mean, would it be wrong to find out who's on these planes that's coming back from Libya, that's landing there in the UK? Can't we vet them? We need to follow them and find out where they're going and look into their history. Thank you so much for being with us, Seth.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. President Trump delivering a powerful anti-terror message after the Manchester attacks. But if you were watching any other channel but this one, you missed it. Why did the mainstream media not air those foreign speeches? President Trump delivering a powerful and tough message in response to the Manchester terror attack. Listen.
So many young, beautiful, innocent people living and enjoying their lives murdered by evil losers.
Evil losers. What a soundbite. But if you were watching ABC, NBC, or CBS, you would have had no idea the president had said that, because the big three networks did not take the president's speech live. Later in the morning, they had a second chance when he spoke again at the Israeli Museum, but no networks took that. And that extended to the cables, CNN and MSNBC as well.
Well, here now is Christopher Bedford, the editor-in-chief of the Daily Caller News Foundation, to talk to us about this. What's your response?
Well, good morning.
Morning.
If you're tuning into the news, you're an American, you're trying to figure out what's going on in the world, you should be able to rely on them to transmit the most powerful man in the world's speech and his thinking and his message after a terror attack on a U.S. ally. And I can't think of a time off the top of my head, any time previously where a speech like this has been ignored. Now, there's a lot of whining from a lot of parts of the liberal media, and you read about it every morning, these new studies that come out that say that Trump voters are cut off from information. But if you were sitting there in the morning watching any of these big three, you missed it completely. And they're not even 24-hour news networks. At the second round, when we saw MSNBC and CNN drop it, That's just dereliction of journalistic duty.
Well, what instead, Christopher, were they running? If they're not running the breaking news of the President of the United States in Israel, a historic visit on the day of a terror attack, what were they running?
It's pretty amazing. They were talking about Russia. They were talking about Mike Flynn. They were talking about narratives that they're working on building.
It looks like Bill Cosby.
Yep, Bill Cosby. They're talking about anything really they could to get away from it. What was even more amazing to me was the day before, if you tuned into Charlie Rose and wanted to hear about Trump's major foreign policy speech in Saudi Arabia, what you instead were hearing about was Billy Bush, and they were replaying these old tapes from the campaign and calling it breaking news. It was it's a total thought bubble.
Chris, why are they doing that, in your estimation?
I think that if this had been a press conference where they'd been able to attack the president or talk about things that they are more interested in talking about, and they're interested in the narrative about Russia, they're interested in the narrative about Flynn and Comey, I think we would have seen them air this, especially the 24-hour news networks. But they don't get that. They weren't able to control the message, and they were unwilling to give Donald Trump access to the American people. And because of that, people who watched their show missed out on some important news and important messaging on America versus terrorism and the world.
There you go. Indeed. It was a good speech, both of them. We had them live here.
All right, well, watch us if you want to hear the president.
All right. Christopher Bedford, Daily Caller, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Breaking news now on this Wednesday morning. More arrests tied to the Manchester terror attack. As we learned, the terrorist was a devout Muslim who even had the Quran memorized. Our next guest, a former Muslim, now a Christian, on what he calls the Quran's dangerous demands for jihad.
Disturbing new details about the killer who turned an Ariana Grande concert into a bloodbath. He's 22-year-old Salman Al-Bidi, who was known to authorities, reportedly knew the Quran by heart, loudly chanting Islamic prayers in the street.
Our next guest, a former Muslim turned Christian, now warns of the Quran's demands for jihad and teachings of hate. Al-Fadi is the author of The Quran Dilemma. He joins us right now live. Good morning to you. Why did you convert?
Good morning. Well, I was basically under the impression that Islam is the final religion. And when I came to the States, I began to hear things about Christianity. I began to explore things. And my motive really was to convert people actually originally to Islam. But through that process, I discovered that I was being misled concerning Islam. And I made a decision years later to follow Christ.
But if Islam radicalizes people, I could see... why aren't billions of people radicalized?
Well, certainly there's elements of Islam, especially in the Quran, that permits fighting against infidels in general. And believe it or not, even it commands Muslims who are followers of this ideology to fight even against hypocrite Muslims. So in other words, if you're a Muslim that stands against the ideology of ISIS, you are not considered to be a pure Muslim anymore, and therefore you're just an infidel. And it's part of that process when you begin to study it and you begin to get indoctrinated through mosques and schooling and memorizing these passages and being told that God will not be pleased with you unless you carry it on to the extreme level of fighting and expanding the agenda of this ideology. Only then God will be pleased with you. And if you die, there are 72 virgins waiting for you. So it's a win-win for them.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your personal story. When you lived in Saudi Arabia, for instance, given how you were taught that the Quran wants you to live your life, how did you look at non-Muslims?
Unfortunately, the Quran in general teaches you that non-Muslims basically are a step below. In other words, they are second or third class citizens in your mind. So they were not equal to me. I did not view them in a way that I needed to respect them as humans. And all of this because the more I was myself becoming religious, if you wish, or radicalized, the less I looked at people who are not similar to me. So that was my view of non-Muslims.
Mm-hmm. So I understand that if we want to understand this, if there's actually going to be reform in the Islamic community, don't look at the leaders, look at the clerics. What are the clerics telling the people? And in this case, we understand the cleric noticed that this guy was radicalized, his scowling every time he condemned ISIS, and no one did anything.
That is absolutely true. It was disturbing to me that his imam was noticing this behavior, yet they kept it to themselves. And that's the whole problem, is that we need those leaders from within the community to cooperate with the counter-terrorism officials, to work with them, if indeed their intent is to assimilate in these communities. But the problem is, what they say is one thing, and the behavior and the action is another.
Any other observations about this suicide bomber?
His behavior was definitely telling. The fact, aside from the fact that he went to Libya and Syria, just the people were noticing that he's changing the growth when he was starting to grow the beard, I should say, and at the same time he was chanting the prayer calling. All of these things are disturbing signs that someone should have at least alerted authority.
Right, and what part of the Quran says you should kill little girls? Because I'm curious how you can possibly justify that act.
Unfortunately, of course, there isn't a specific verse that will say kill girls or little people, but at the same time, in his mind, these are infidels. And even if they were Muslims attending the concert, in his mind, those are not pure Muslims anymore. So there are many commands in there to go and fight and kill and terrorize the infidels.
All right. Al-Fadi, the author of The Quran Dilemma, we thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
All right. Meanwhile, Jillian Milley has other breaking news taking place.
That's right. Here's what's happening right now. Good morning. Breaking now. Brand new details about the innocent victims killed in the Manchester terror attack. 10 out of the 22 killed have been identified. The youngest, 8-year-old Safi Rose Ralsos, who attended the Ariana Grande concert with her mother and sister. Both are injured, her mother critically. She's in a coma and does not know her daughter has been killed yet. And stories of heroism amid tragedy. We're learning a brave aunt, Kelly Brewster, sacrificed her life to save her niece, shielding her from the explosion. And a homeless man also being hailed a hero for rushing to save children who were hurt in the attack. A massive data breach affecting 16,000 gun owners. Authorities in Florida say thieves hacked into a concealed weapons list, stealing names and social security numbers. The state is offering free identity protection to those affected. Officials believe the attack comes from overseas. Hundreds of thousands of foreigners overstayed their visas last year. That's according to the Department of Homeland Security. They came on boats and planes, most of them traveling from Canada, Mexico, Brazil, China, and India. People overstaying their visas make up to an estimated 40% of the 11 million undocumented immigrants living in the U.S. And how about this? They fought for our freedom, and now veterans outraged over a homeowners association telling them they can only wave their American flags 23 days out of the year. An email sent to residents listing guidelines on how to help maintain the aesthetic of the community, listing certain dates flags can be displayed.
Do you plan on taking it down?
When I'm dead.
Tom Wilder says you don't mess with his flag. I'm sure that's not the last we're going to hear of that. Let's look at your headlines this morning, Brian.
I wonder what those 23 days are.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jillian.
Meanwhile, 23 minutes before the top of the hour, one issue Pope Francis and President Trump see eye to eye on, and that's stopping the rise of ISIS. Father Jonathan Morris is here next with how two of the most powerful men in the world are joining forces.
I don't, and it feels like home after you've been there for a long time, just being in Rome, and but also it feels like home because all of those beautiful paintings are really stories of the Bible, and it feels like, gosh, this is what life is all about. This is the story of our existence, our purpose, and where we're going to end up, hopefully heaven.
I think I remember when we took the tour, they said that Michelangelo had painted them on scaffolding on his back.
That's right. That's right.
Fascinating.
The Sistine Chapel is usually filled with people, hundreds of people going through rather quickly, so it's kind of noisy. This is a very special opportunity to be there alone, and it's also where they elect the new pope. Mm-hmm. That's where all of the cardinals go into and make big decisions.
I watched you this morning, and I know we were kind of wondering in anticipation what it's going to be like. From what we know now, without a readout, how do you think the president's doing? How do you think it went?
I think it was fascinating. Donald Trump was not known before he became president to be a very religious person. That's not making a judgment of him, but that wasn't how he was known. And here he's going to visit the great leaders of Islam, of Judaism, and of Christianity, and he is seeing, I think, he's getting a very sobering experience of how important religion is, also on the level of politics and peace and conflict. And I think it's probably a huge, very impactful thing in his own life.
Sure. I mean, Donald Trump's a capitalist, and the
United Nations. Why is nobody doing anything in Iraq? ISIS is destroying, killing all these Christians.
You should have called President Obama. They're great friends. And President Obama was the one that let everything become the Wild West in the Middle East.
He made it very clear what the world needed to do. And thank God, very soon after, President Obama did start doing get more active against ISIS. And unfortunately, it was too slow.
Syria was pulverized by that time, and we put advisors into Iraq. That's hardly the big action that Pope Francis wanted.
Okay, they also agreed that the United States should not be involved in, and I'm not saying in this meeting, but just generally that the United States should not, the West should not be involved in nation building all over the world.
Sure.
Both of them agree about that. So there's a lot of agreement.
Let's talk a little bit about protocol.
Pro-life, right?
Yes, and they did talk about that in the release today.
Let's talk a little bit about protocol, because at the beginning of the program we were talking about how some in the Italian press had said, it's distasteful that the President of the United States had a coat unbuttoned at one point when he was in the presence of the pontiff. But when it comes to, for instance, headscarves, which both Melania and Ivanka wore, is that mandatory, or is it suggested?
Yeah, it's not it's not mandatory. It's there have been plenty of people who have gone in front of the Holy Father, even in an official visit like this, without the scarf. But it just shows that that they have chosen to follow that protocol as a sign of respect. It really goes back to biblical biblical language of when you're in the presence of God. Not that the Pope is God, but when you're in a sacred place. That St. Paul talked about women covering using a head cover. So
it's beautiful. You get a chance to wear a mandia. It's so gorgeous, and it looks beautiful on Melania and Ivanka. Now, when I was there, though, we did have to cover our arms and we had to cover our legs. And if you forget to cover when you take the tour, you can buy covering there.
That's right.
Very handy.
Very small price.
You can get anything. There's so many gift shops around the Vatican. Am I right?
Yes.
It might
I'm
have
glad
been
you
free.
got to see that,
but I think there was a small little fee.
All right.
Thank you so much, Father.
Thank you, Father Jonathan.
Yes, thank you.
All right, straight ahead, the terror investigation in Manchester developing by the minute this morning. Police making new arrests as we're learning more details about the terrorists.
And the mayor of Minneapolis delivering her State of the City address inside a mosque. What happens when our Pete Hegseth tried to talk to her?
But you didn't call out the community of Muslims to make sure they're rooting out, drive them out, the radicals that may be in their midst.
You do a good job of that.
I gotta go. Question, you mentioned Donald Trump. He gave.
The mayor of Minneapolis, Betsy Hodges, gave her annual State of the City address yesterday, and it was delivered inside a mosque. And she devoted the official government speech to bashing President Trump.
All right, our own Pete Hegseth was actually there. He was able to talk to the mayor right after the speech, but it was not easy getting word in. He joins us right now. Hey, Pete.
No, it was not easy, and I'm a little stuffed up because I've been chasing mayors around who refuse to talk to us. As we noted on the program earlier this week, she's giving the speech in a mosque, which leftists are usually very keen on pointing out separation of church and state. So we wanted to ask her about that. We also figured she would use the opportunity to bash President Trump and, of course, talk about global climate change. So we were there in the mosque and attempted to ask her the questions that she refused to answer. We put in 2 formal requests for it. Here's how it went down.
Cities like Minneapolis and the people who live in them are squarely in Donald Trump's sights. His agendas of oppression and regression and suppression have no place in Minneapolis, and we are standing firm in our resistance to them. When Donald Trump comes after any part of our community, he'll find 419,000 Minneapolitans and me standing squarely in his way. That's the kind of wall I can support.
Mayor, we'd love to ask you a couple of questions. Okay. It's a free country. I can we told you that. No, we asked, and she's refusing to answer. Mayor, why'd you hold this in a mosque? Would you do it in a church? Thank you. It's great to be here. Clearly made a statement holding this in a mosque. As many on the progressive left say, make hay about separation of church and state. Why a mosque, and would you do it in a church?
I'm giving it a mosque today because our Muslim community gave support. I will say what I have to say about it in the speech.
Conflict with separation of church and state, or mosque and state?
No.
No. Would you give an official state speech in a church from a pulpit?
I have given official speeches in churches before.
Like the state of a city?
I don't know that I've given the state of the city in a church before. Our Muslim community needs a lot of support right now because one community should not be held responsible for the reprehensible acts of a few members of that community.
But you didn't call out the community of Muslims to make sure they're rooting out, drive them out, the radicals that may be in their midst.
You do a good job of that, Pete. I gotta go.
Question, you mentioned Donald Trump. He gave a speech in Saudi Arabia. It was well received. We had a chance to talk to the mayor briefly, although she's got a cohort of lots of people that love to bump into us. She answered a couple of questions, not very directly. Wanted to ask about President Trump. She walked away before we could do so, but I think it's a little bit interesting that he gave a speech in Saudi Arabia. We've been told he has hateful rhetoric, yet he was well received by the place that keeps the two of the holiest shrines in Islam.
I don't know that she wanted to talk to you much, Peter.
She sure didn't. But you know what she did do? She sent out a fundraising Facebook post using my name and Fox News Channel. So they're happy to use us as a wedge, but not willing to actually talk to us and engage on the issues. Very briefly skimmed over the issue of radicalization. And as you both know, here in Minneapolis, there's been a serious problem of Somali Muslim youth going to fight with Al-Shabaab and ISIS, including active terrorist cells that a federal judge believe exist here. So there are real issues in this community that she could be addressing and doesn't, and to be in a mosque and not use that as an opportunity, I think is a real missed opportunity. She wanted to ask those questions. She didn't want to answer.
Did she need the votes? Does she need the votes? Is the Muslim community so strong that they can change the tide of an election?
There is a large Somali Muslim population in Minneapolis. She needs the politically correct love. I mean, her whole speech was about one Minneapolis, which is great. But if you've got radicals in your midst and you're not driving them out, that's a real problem. I also have a problem with the double standard. We checked into it. She's had events in churches, but certainly never an official speech. I mean, this speech, the announcement for it went out on official mayoral letterhead. It was the State of the City address, which is mandated by the law here in Minneapolis. She wouldn't do the same in a church, and I think that's a double standard.
Yeah, maybe she will. Maybe she will in the future.
I was going to say, this is the kind of speech, though, that you normally give at City Hall, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, the tradition is to do it outside of City Hall, but yes, you normally, but not necessarily in a house of worship.
Especially after the terrorist attack in London, you would think she would just keep it neutral and do it at City Hall, but maybe she will have another speech in the church.
We shall see.
We'll see.
We shall see.
Okay, honey and lemon and tea. Will help with their voice.
I got a little bit of already.
All right, well, good man.
I remember I had that in I had that in Kuwait when I was there, and they said tear gas would open up.
Pete, tear gas if you've got some.
They would open up all your sinuses
for a month.
Yeah, and true. Up next, more on top stories that the president's visiting with the Pope and Manchester terror attacks. These are the two stories we're all over. Governor Mike Huckabee can handle it all at the top of the hour.
And now that ISIS is targeting our children to make families live in fear, is it finally time to make the terrorists fear us? Medal of Honor recipient Dakota Meyer.
A Fox News alert breaking this morning. Police in Manchester are arresting 3 more people in connection with the bombing at Monday night's Ariana Grande concert. That means 4 people are now in custody, including the terrorist who blew himself up, his brother, who is a 23-year-old.
And by the way, the number of people injured is escalating. 22 people are dead. Many children, dozens more, as I mentioned, were injured than we thought. Let's go bring in now former governor of Arkansas, Fox News contributor, and former GOP presidential candidate, Governor Huckabee. Governor, I'm sure you're watching with great interest of the president's tour. Meanwhile, our heads were on a swivel as we look at Manchester. What do you find the most disturbing about this terror attack?
I think it's the target, Brian. The fact that these monsters would target a bunch of young teenage girls. If you're in war with somebody, you go after the combatants. You go after the people who can do you harm. These girls couldn't harm anyone. They were just kids. And to intentionally try to kill the most vulnerable among us is just unspeakable and insufferable.
Governor, you used the word monster. Do you remember yesterday, President Trump, I believe, it was yesterday morning, 4 a.m. our time, he came out and said he's not gonna say monster. He's gonna say they're losers.
Well, I agree with the president to call them losers. You can call them monsters. You can call them animals. They're subhuman. This is not what human beings do. Even the most warlike human beings may make war against other people, but they don't take it out on people who can't defend themselves and ambush them with this kind of terrorist cowardice attack. That's what I think most people around the globe find so just repulsive about these acts of Islamic terror. They're not intended to harm the people who are the political leaders. They're not intended to harm the people who are people of authority. They're intended to harm the weak, the vulnerable, the innocent. And as a result of that, they go to places where people should feel safe, at a concert, at a sporting event. And that makes it even more compounded.
Sure. Governor, Theresa May, the UK Prime Minister, yesterday said a second terror attack imminent. She changed the threat level to critical. That's the highest stage that they could possibly be at. And ultimately, it sounds like, according to the Home Secretary, it seems likely this guy did not act alone. And so the people of Great Britain, in particular, are on pins and needles, although we've all talked to our families and our children are worried about things as well. What's interesting, though, in the wake of the Ariana Grande attack, now it seems that the fans of Justin Bieber are begging him to cancel his tour because they're worried about their safety. They're worried that even the fact that they know that it is a target, they cannot be protected.
And that's really the object of terror, is to cause us to completely change our lifestyles, to make us live under the threat of these bullies who make us basically hide and hibernate and run for cover in our daily lives, because they create just enough fear and anxiety that people are afraid to do the things they would normally do. You know, I'm standing here in Israel. One of the things I think the Israelis have taught us is don't cower to the terrorists.
Right.
If there is an attack in Israel in a cafe at noon, by 4 o'clock they've mopped up all of the blood and they're open for business, not because of the money. They're open for business to basically say, you are not going to close us down and make us stop. That's important to do.
I hardly can stand these politicians that get up after, no matter how high or low, from what nation. We're going to stand strong together. We're going to find out who did this. Well, what about your security measures? Well, listen to these experts in Israel. They have people walking through audiences dressed as fans. They have metal detectors all over U.S. I can't go to a Knick game, even no one wants to see a Knick game, without going through metal detectors and emptying your pockets. Here they are in Manchester. Eyewitnesses say there was absolutely no protection. Parents now have to find out not only how much of the tickets, how are you getting there, but they want to know, they have to find out what the arenas are doing in terms of security. Don't you agree?
Totally agree, Brian. And one of the things that's very troubling is leaders will say, if you see something, say something. And yet, if you say something, you're going to be called a bigot. You're going to be called out because you were politically incorrect. So, you know, that's the reason a lot of people don't say anything, even when they see something, because they're afraid if they do, someone is going to accuse them of being an Islamophobe or, you know, somehow being a bigot. And nobody wants to be called that. Nobody wants to be a hater. So as a result, because of these high horse statements that some of the leaders make, we're actually less safe.
Well, you know, as a pastor, I know in like some of these, you see in the Christian, among Christians, you have some people that pull away and they start their own type of Christianity, and then they get brainwashed and they pull a few people. We've seen that in Texas years ago. But in this community, in the Muslim community, not that all of them are like that. It's just those radical Islamic. There are a few of them. It's not all of them, of course. It's not even the majority of them. And we had a former Muslim who's turned Christian, and he taught about how it happens. Listen to this and we'll get your reaction.
Of course, there isn't a specific verse that will say kill girls or little people, but at the same time, in his mind, these are infidels. And even if they were Muslims attending the concert, in his mind, those are not pure Muslims anymore. So there are many commands in there to go and fight and kill and terrorize the infidels. The Quran in general teaches you that non-Muslims basically are a step below. In other words, they are second or third class citizens in your mind.
So we've heard, Governor, that these are individuals that they really are the losers, as President Trump would say, that they weren't accepted among their group. And then they see these videos, these recruitment videos of ISIS saying, you're going to be hailed a hero. You're going to die a hero if you come and join us. And that's what's appealing to them. How do you get into their minds and say, this is not the case?
We cannot ignore that there is a wider group of individuals linked to this attack. The threat level should be increased for the time being, from severe to critical. This means that their assessment is not only that an attack remains highly likely, but that a further attack may be imminent.
British authorities frantically hunting for perhaps more accomplices to Monday's terror attack as the UK Prime Minister Theresa May warns of another attack. It could be imminent.
Joining us live from London, dailymail.com, global columnist Katie Hopkins. Good morning to you, Katie.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm very impressed with your article in the Daily Mail online. I'd like to read a little bit of it so that we can talk about it so our audience who probably hasn't had a chance to read it. You were commenting on the mayor of Manchester. He said it's time to get back to business as usual. And you said, I want to scream at him. Business as usual. Business as usual. Tell that to the mother of 16-year-old Georgina Callender. Someone slaughtered her most special thing, the tiny baby she carried, birthed, equipped with all the things that she could protect her from the world with, smiling at her loveliness as she became a young woman. And you say it is business as usual. The dead never get to carry on as normal. And you go on to say the next time it could be my daughter, my child. Why did you write that?
And thank you for reading that. That column is at dailymail.com. But I feel as a mother, and that's really one of the truths I want to tell, is I may work in the kind of media game, but I am ultimately a mother of two little girls, 12 and 11, and a boy aged 8. And I knelt at the end of my bed those are the real vigils in this country, not the propaganda stuff you're seeing on our state broadcaster of these people making heart gestures to the sky. No. The real vigils are people inside their homes with small babies that they are frightened to take out. And this is in a country, 21st century Britain, where another attack is imminent. You know, I wonder how big that gulf is between leaders that say, we are stronger, we are defiant, versus the fact we're going to have tanks trundling along our streets any day soon. We are not defiant. We are not strong. We are weak. And we just let a jihadi who just returned from Libya and possibly Syria back to the UK, we're not allowed to call him an Islamic terrorist. You are not allowed to use the word Islam in relation to him. We have to call him evil. You'll hear in the vocabulary being used, no one identifies him as an Islamic terrorist. It's about making it this nebulous thing, this evil, which means you can't do anything about it because you can't identify it properly. And I think we're saying, no, we want to hear the truth. This is Islamic terrorism, and we need to start fighting
Katie, but
back.
who are you speaking
but sadly,
for?
our
Katie,
aren't
who are you
doing that.
Is this just Katie Hopkins speaking, or do you think that the other people in Britain are getting that fed up to stop taking it on the chin? And it doesn't mean tanks in the streets. It means don't let the guy from Syria back in without questioning and surveilling, or back in at all.
Absolutely. I would never, ever dream of saying that I speak for Britain. I see the lefties, the liberals, Lily Allen do that all the time. I speak for Britain. No one speaks for Britain. I do speak for the voices that can no longer be heard because they've been silenced by the PC, who threatened them with arrest. I've been threatened with investigation for speaking out like this. It's no problem for me. If that's what they need to do to silence me, they can carry on. I will stand strong against this. But I do think I speak for people who recognise that we're making choices in this country. We chose to let a jihadi back in, and we chose, therefore, for our little girls to be slaughtered. We choose to protect the human rights of jihadis, 3,000 of whom are roaming those streets because their human rights matter more. We're defending that over our small babies. And I think many mothers like me, many fathers, many normal people perhaps, just feel that we've had enough now. We've had enough. We're tired of buying into the narrative that we're strong and the jihadis are weak. No, we've been knocked down, we've been trampled on, and I think the general population is fed up with being treated so awfully, seeing our little ones slaughtered, just to look after the rights of these terrorists that want to kill us.
Katie, in Great Britain, there's a famous saying, keep calm and carry on. But you say, you know, you shouldn't be calm. We shouldn't carry on. It's time to do something about this, because when you talk about the people who have contacted you and say, my kids are afraid to go out. We're not going to go shopping. We're not going to go out for dinner. Essentially, and we've heard this a number of times, when terrorists are able to strike that kind of fear into the hearts of the people they're targeting, they win.
Absolutely. And what I'm seeing, you know, I've had people kindly leaking to me things that they've been sent, school teachers being told, you know, this isn't about Islam. This is not the Quran. And also, this is a drive to increase reporting of hate crimes. So it said, we will not tolerate hate. Please report hate. So we will see in the next couple of weeks reports of a spike in hate crime. I guarantee you that. And I think what we also heard yesterday was a man saying, we will, it was the leader of the Greater Manchester Police Force, we will not tolerate hate crime in the UK. And I think for many of us, we're kind of saying, hold on, we'll tolerate the slaughter of an innocent 8-year-old, beautiful little Safi, but we won't tolerate hate. You know, we have our priorities all wrong. And what I'm saying is to Great Britain, we now need to stand united, but united against terror. We will stand united in calling for action, demanding a response. We want jihadists out of this country or locked up. They cannot have rights over our sons and daughters.
Since that Belgium and France agreed, the cadence of attacks are picking up, the carnage is growing, and nothing seems to be done. It didn't even seem like there were metal detectors in the biggest theater in Europe, and that is a travesty.
It is a travesty. I certainly wouldn't be allowing my children to go to any big gathering, and I'm not one to be easily, you know, run over, as it were, but I would not let my children loose right now in the city. I walked here this morning, I walked past a big group of students, foreign students, and all I could think was, oh, God, that's a big group of kids to be in one place. Oh, what are they doing there? Why are they there? And behind them was a police van. There is a lot of police presence. It feels frightening here in the UK. It feels like we're under attack. And what really breaks my heart is that we have let this happen. We have invited these soldiers of a religion onto our streets, 7 million more waiting on the African coast to come, and we will welcome them over with our open borders. It destroys me that this country that I love so much, that I wanted to fight for and defend, has been allowed to fall at the hands of politicians who still won't call this for what it is. This is Islamic terror, and we need to fight back.
Katie, you hate to tell people not to go out and enjoy their lives because then the terrorists win and they have affected us and we don't want to go to concerts and things like that. You're right. We do think about this, especially as mothers. Now when we see kids in big groups, what have you told your daughters? What message do we need to be telling our kids?
Absolutely. Well, I am starting to equip them with the things that I think they need to know. So at breakfast yesterday, they saw me being very upset. They heard the news. They heard about a bomb made of ball bearings, of nuts and bolts. They were asking me about it. This is an 11 and 12-year-old and an 8-year-old. They were saying, why would a man put nuts and bolts into a bomb? And I was saying that it causes more injury to more people. And the children said, well, I'd rather be shot than killed by ball bearings. And my 8-year-old was like, yeah, I'd rather be shot quickly. That's a conversation.
Yeah, nice breakfast conversation. Unbelievable.
It's unbelievable indeed. All right, Katie Hopkins joining us today from London, from thedailymail.com. Katie, thank you very much. Great perspective.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Good. All right, it's about 18 minutes before the top of the hour on this very busy Wednesday. We got a Fox News alert. It's a trend we've seen all over and over again, but is there really a foolproof way to defend soft targets like that arena in Manchester? The most vulnerable locations in the crosshairs of ISIS. We'll talk about that, the soft target trend.
All right, the Manchester suicide bomber identified as 22-year-old Salman al-Beidi. He's killed 22, injured dozens. In fact, I think the number's over 100 now, by setting off an IED near one of the concert arena's exit. It's not even clear if he was inside and even had a ticket. This follows a terrorism trend where attackers target the areas before security checkpoints, raising new concerns about soft targets in the U.S. Here to explain is Paul Violas. He is the former supervisor for the New York District Attorney's Criminal Court Unit and played a pivotal role in the 2014 security situation with the Super Bowl at MetLife Stadium. So first off, when you hear about how the British approach security security in a metropolitan area, a little different than us.
No question, Brian. I mean, we got a lot of heat. I remember when the planning of the Super Bowl was at the Giants Stadium because people were saying how inconvenient it was going to be and how much time it was going to cost vendors because they pushed the perimeter back. But in pushing the perimeter back that far, even though they had so many threats against that venue, not one thing happened. They were able to successfully screen the undercarriage of every vehicle and properly check all bags before they were allowed in.
And this guy, you said this was something clear. This wasn't a guy with a vest.
Correct.
He didn't even have a backpack. He had a bag.
That's correct. I mean, Brian, everyone was talking suicide bomber. Suicide bomber is strapped. He was not strapped. He was carrying a bag. Think about how when we transition to the United States, when we go to venues, when we bring our families to venues and someone asks your wife, well, let me look inside your bag. Are they really checking for anything? Or they just take a cursory look and move on? If they really checked his bag, it begs the question, what are the qualifications of the person that was doing that screening? That's the thing that we need to be looking at.
And was he supposed to be a suicide bomber to go off prematurely? If you're carrying a bag, that's not usually how a suicide bomber operates, right?
That is absolutely correct. Remember, Brian, it's a different profile. The pedigree of the individual that's going to plant an IED as opposed to someone who's going to go in strapped, two entirely different things.
If I go to an event, I need a ticket, and it looks like he's in the foyer area. It's not even clear he needed a ticket at that point. The concert's over, people coming out. He walks in, bright red shirt, carrying a bag. I don't know what's suspicious about that. Could that slip by American security?
Well, let's use Yankee Stadium, for example, because I'm familiar with that. You still, when the game is over, you still can't get in. They shut access down at that point. So, it comes down to policy and procedure. It comes down to us accepting a different role with respect to security. And that's just not moving the perimeter back, but it's also crisis management from that particular stage.
Also, we understand, too, the brother's been detained, at least maybe arrested.
Right.
They expect they're on the ultimate, the highest alert possible in Britain. Do you think does this look to you like a cell? Do you expect more arrests today?
Yes and yes, and I'll tell you why. When you look at the composite of the ordnance that was used, he was cooked. I mean, he was taught how to make it. And there was no question that a lot of time and effort went into why that venue, why that particular concert, the demographic of those that were attending, and why at that particular time and why at that particular location. He was coached and he was trained. Other people are going to be arrested, not just today, but going forward. Remember, Brian, you and I have talked about this before. When we look at London has more CCTV coverage than any city